and welcome to this episode of Engage People and Drive Change. In a world where only 33% of employees are feeling engaged, we're tackling a tough question today, but a question that's going to open up the conversation for us all on how to improve staff engagement. We want to talk about what the smallest change libraries can make to improve workforce engagement might be. We're going to jump into that conversation in just a moment. We'll see you soon. Welcome, everyone, to Engage People and Drive Change. I am Jonathan Banks from Next. I'm here with the marvelous Meta Surya. Meta, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for asking. It's a beautiful day here in Minneapolis where I'm at. How are things where you're at?
Well, in Singapore, it's still pretty hot and humid in June. It's kind of like in the middle of the two.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to catch up with you there soon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Meta, so we can get started and learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Maida Surya, she, her pronouns, and I'm the Partner Excellence Manager at Next. So I have quite a bit of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and currently, doing great work at Next, creating our best world.
Well, thank you, Maida. Thank you for introducing yourself. Everybody connect with Maida online and make sure y'all stay in touch. Here at Next, we've got a couple things coming up that we want to talk about before we get into this episode of Engage People and Drive Change. There's a few events coming up. We've got at the Ask Me Anything, courtesy of the St. Paul Restaurant Resiliency Program. That's coming up on June 21st. We're going to be down in Chicago at the American Library Association Conference on June 23rd. And then we have the first inaugural Our Best World Conference 2023, St. Paul, Minnesota, on July 13th. So we look forward to seeing you all at those events that are coming up. And if you haven't gotten a chance, go out and check out the Catalyst Advantage service on Next's website, ncxt.co, and subscribe to the show. But let's get into the topic, engage people and drive change. We're talking about what is the smallest change libraries can make that will improve workforce engagement. And Maida, as we look into the data around workforce engagement, it was really interesting to see Gallup's State of the Workforce report from 2022 and see that only 33% of staff are feeling engaged throughout in the workplace. And there's another statistic that I thought was pretty interesting. Only about, and I got it written down here, only about 10% of staff feel completely respected throughout the day. And that's something interesting to dive into and can really be a big impact on workforce engagement. So what do you think some of these small steps we can take in the library space that will help us improve workforce engagement?
Yeah, for sure. So, actually, what I really wanted to highlight is the work that we do with these libraries. So, for example, like Hennepin County Library, as well as Dakota County Library, we we do something called full skill consulting, and this will be relevant. And if you kind of just hear me out, what we do with them typically is we conduct micro groups, focus groups, and knowledge cafes with different levels of stakeholders, and to kind of like hear the voices of like employees from different levels, and we typically turn that back as a report and reflect it back to the different stakeholders. And I mention this because through our experiences doing this work over and over again, we realize that the input that people have, it comes from their everyday experiences with their colleagues, with customers, with patrons, and so forth. So I guess what I wanted to highlight in terms of like the small steps that everyone can take is really to be more intentional in connecting and hearing your employees, peer stories, and even people that you don't typically chat with, right? So if there are opportunities for interdepartmental, gatherings or community building or like networking, professional development, what have you, I think that is really a great way to, um, to be part of the small steps that you can take to improve like workforce engagement really because then I mean it's hopeful for us because then when we do these engagements with companies we will then be able to actually get richer inputs as well, so that's what I would really encourage.
I really like that. And you laid out a few different examples of small steps that folks could take, and how we've done that in the past. Can you think of any, like, a specific small step maybe like a staff person could take in their daily life? A lot of times we're kind of looking for the change in the organization, maybe on our team, and the change a lot of times is going to start with us. In fact, most times it's going to start on the individual level. So, thinking from an individual perspective, what's a small change that an individual might take in a library atmosphere?
Yeah, so I think I mean, specifically in the library atmosphere, I mean, you're surrounded by knowledge and books and information. So I think, at least in my imagination, like that is a really good starting point to talk about like different topics with your colleagues and coworkers. It doesn't have to be anything like so deep and so intricate. It could really be like information about pets or anything of that sort. Back to my original point of like just being able to hear stories from your colleagues and peers and other folks that you don't perhaps like typically interact with, that not only enriches like your insights and perspectives and experience, but also the other person's and eventually the organization as well. So I think it's really that intention with interaction with other folks.
And I like how you talked about talking to people maybe that you haven't spoken with quite frequently. It's one of the things that we find is that the different maybe job classifications or roles within the library might work together quite a bit and have a lot of conversation, but then across departments, across roles, there isn't as much conversation happening. And so when we think about who am I going to interact with today, just being really intentional about what are some people that I want to talk to who I haven't talked to think about getting out of your silo, to think about maybe folks who have different experiences than you have. um, some ways like that can be just a small change to your day. It's not a big strategy of I'm going to make sure I do this tour of talking to all these different people, one new person every day, but this is something you can think about at the beginning of every day, just a small change that can improve workforce engagement. What do you think about from the management level? What are some things that could happen, a small change that could happen at the management level that could improve engagement?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what it's related to what we do. So through the Catalyst Advantage program, like we encourage folks to take on like habits or like form habits, and it's I hope if anything else you remember this phrase like the laughably small steps. So I think from a managerial standpoint, it's again back to the idea of like intention of when it comes to like decision making, who you interact with, who you give assignments to, how are you like hearing the voices in the room, and
Mm.
things of that sort. Those are like the laughably small steps that you can, once you're aware, that you can think about like ways to ensure that you are being inclusive of everyone in the room, and even like going further and thinking about, well, whose voices are not in the room, or like what kind of decisions am I just like doing this out of like my how I was just conditioned to do it, or can there be more intention with this?
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great point. And I'm going back to this idea about and the statistics around 10% of workforce feeling like they're respected throughout the day. So that means that most people are feeling some level of disrespect throughout the day, you're not going to have a very safe workplace, engaged workplace when you're fighting statistics like that. So, is there anything that managers can do to help improve uh, how their staff feels respected throughout the day, or to make sure that that's a consistent experience for them throughout the day?
Yeah, for sure. I think something that we take for granted. I mean, well, it's two things. So one is, when people do good work, we don't typically, take a pause to celebrate and recognize and just kind of like, I don't know, the weirdest way to put it is like breathe in the kind of like success that has kind of happened through the work that's done. And then on the flip side, I think when there's like a small mistake or like something that's pointed out, it's kind of like a two-way thing where the person that is receiving the feedback may feel that, they're always being pointed out for things that they're not doing well. In fact, maybe they've done like 10 things well, but they're doing one thing that isn't that can be improved on, and that's something that honestly would stick with them, right? Like, and that's really how we're wired to think, like to kind of like remember more of like the negative feedback. So I think to summarize, like just both pausing and recognizing and taking more steps to celebrate and recognize people so that they feel respected, and also balancing that out with like I guess constructive or good feedback.
Well, that's a really good point. Making sure that people remember the positive feedback, right? And they're not overwhelmed by, constructive feedback or all the things that they need to work on, but they're also, just overwhelmed by the fact that they're appreciated and that the work that they do matters. That's a big deal. How about from a library leader perspective? Let's say I'm the chief librarian, or the director of a library director, or the director of my library. What are some things I can put in place, just some small steps that's going to help improve engagement for my library?
Yeah, I mean, from when you're in a much higher like level or position, I think I always go back to you are modeling the way in like whatever you do, and in some other ways um, your words and and the way you carry yourself like matters a lot more. And so I think leading by example is definitely one area, and the other piece is really just to like reach out to your employees, not just the managers, but to your perhaps like level one or like entry level employees, just so that they know that they're being seen, they're being heard, they're being recognized for their work. So I think that kind of encompasses like, I think we kind of went like layer by layer there. And so when you're at the top leadership level, I think it matters a lot more when you do some of those things. But what about you, Jonathan? Like, what other perspectives would you add there?
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. Well, I like the fact that you brought up this idea of like altitude, what they call like altitude sickness or something like something along those lines, where the kind of the further up in the hierarchy you go, the more disconnected from your staff you become, and so it's harder to form those relationships and create that one-on-one engagement. So some what you're talking about there is really cool about just being cognizant of the example that you create. And we hear this all the time about sometimes there's a particular type of leader that is not leading by example. They might be behind their desk more often, maybe issuing like commands, for lack of a better word, but kind of just commanding from behind the desk and not getting out and being with folks. And that's something that you want to do. It's been more difficult because of the hybrid workforce. It's been an adaptation for those folks, and this solution is not everybody has to come back in. Fortunately, in the library setting, so much of the work is in person that we've had a natural return to work there, but a lot of the positions are not. And so the leader needs to be able to think about some ways to engage and show that example even in a virtual setting. And here's some small ways to do that. One is empowering the organization to communicate themselves. So making sure that folks have a role in enterprise communications. Perhaps what you want to do is, if you send out a newsletter or some sort of communication like that, be a part of that newsletter each time, but rotate who is writing the bulk of the newsletter. So if you have a letter from the editor, for instance, that might be you, or a letter from the director, that might be you, just a small blurb. But if we do, each branch of the library writes one of these each month, and you're participating with each one, you're empowering your staff while also being engaged and leading by example as a leader. So that's one thing that I can think of that might not be the smallest of the small steps that we can take, but it is something that we can take, unilaterally, with a small amount of time dedicated from each participant in that process. So that's kind of like my favorite one that I leave right now, because it works so well in the virtual setting.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like the point that you bring up around like the rotating of, who writes the newsletter. I mean, that's really what we have like advised, our library leaders to do. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that it's not just a small step that an individual can take, but there's, group and community level effort to that we're, in this together to make the workforce more engaging for our employees.
Absolutely. Well, Maida, thank you for talking through this topic today. It's been a lot of fun learning from you, learning some of these points that you have about how we can take these small changes that are going to improve workforce engagement. Thank you, Maida, for everything you brought to the conversation today. It's been a lot of fun.
Likewise, thank you, Jonathan, for asking great questions, and yeah.
I do what I can. I just try to be curious. That's all we can do, right? Is just try to be a little curious here. Some of the things that I thought were really good takeaways here was that we are going to, think about, as a manager, to be pointing out wins. And so we can think about how staff is going to be remembering the fact that they're being praised, and not being overwhelmed by all the things that they need to work on. We all have a lot of things that we want to get to. And so as a manager, we can make sure that our staff is remembering the encouragement and the praise that they've received. As a staff member, getting around, talking to people, getting outside of your department, unit, whatever it might be, being intentional around who it is, maybe writing down at the beginning of the day, I want to reach out to so-and-so because they're in another department, because they have different life experiences, because we share something in common but haven't connected on it yet, don't normally get the chance to. Just being intentional there, that can help improve engagement. And then for, if you're in a leadership role at the library, really showing that example, both in the in-person environment, hybrid and virtual environment, finding ways to just small little things you can do to be engaged and lead by example. So thank you for pointing all those great points out to us, Maida. We're going to go ahead and remind folks once again that the Restaurant Resiliency Program is doing Ask Me Anything on June 21st. You're going to catch next at the American Library Association Conference in Chicago on June 23rd, and then Our Best World Conference 2023 in St. Paul, July 13th. Come and join us there. That's going to be a lot of fun. Go ahead and subscribe to the show. Follow Maida online. Follow me online. We look forward to talking to you all soon. Have a great day.